It's the Underpowered Hour. On this week's show, looks like Land Rover's making money again. Love it, can't drive it. The 5-door Jimny, an all-new segment, Winch Wednesday, and a tip-top tooltip about bench vices. And now, here's the show. Welcome to the Underpowered Hour. I'm Steve Barris, mild-mannered television executive by day and Land Rover collector by night. You can find out more about our cars and what we're working on at thebarriscollection.com or follow us on Instagram at thebarriscollection. I'm joined, as always, by my good friend, Ike Goss.
Thank you to everyone joining us today. I'm the 16-inch wheel to Steven's 22-inch wheel. I'm the practical sidewall of podcasting. Ike Goss. I own and operate Pangolin 4x4 in Springfield, Oregon, where we live and breathe Land Rovers. Check us out online on Facebook, Instagram at Pangolin 4x4. Let's get started.
All right, Ike. Well, in the news this week, some news that you brought in. I actually haven't received this news, as Land Rover financial news makes me sad, so I avoid it. But this is actually, for the first time in like 2 years, non-sad Land Rover financial news.
It's actually great.
Yeah, it kind of is great. So apparently, according to you, the last quarter, the last financial quarter for Land Rover was profitable. They actually made money.
Yes, that's true. They did make money. Apparently, rising sales and supply chain easing of supply chain issues have created a situation where Land Rover Jaguar is turning a profit. I don't know how much of that is Jaguar. Turning a profit. So that's good news for Tata Motors, who had 2 years of, tough 2 years with
tough 2 years.
Semiconductor availability issues and various things.
How was the rest of their business? How was like the Mahindra and the tuk-tuks and all the other stuff that they make? Like, were the Indian not quite cars, were they selling well?
I don't know the answer to that, to be honest with you. I know that they have some other electric car manufacturers, and they are one of India's leading electric vehicle manufacturers, leading vehicle producers in general. But I couldn't say. I don't know the answer to that.
And they're a giant industrial company. I mean, they make all kinds of crazy stuff. But, that's interesting to know. Well, good thing. Hopefully they are not going to shut down Land Rover or sell it to whomever, AT&T or something. Hopefully they just keep it going. Keep gas in that Land Rover tank, and it'll pay off eventually. Tata, don't you worry.
Don't
you worry. Well, I'm interested to see what the not being able to sell Jaguars for what sounds like 2 years once they phase out this last round of cars that they're on now. I believe they're taking something like a 2-year gap to 2025 when the new electric models will come out, and even then, I believe I read there's only 2 coming out. There'll be a sports car and an SUV, a sporty SUV, I'm sure. But those 2 cars, and it won't be the I-Pace, the current electric car. It will be something completely new. And that will happen in 2025. So what do we do between the end of this year when they're not making any more cars? And then I guess nothing. I guess we just wait for a year and a little bit.
Just wait for the development to happen, So
good. Well, they're going to need a CEO before they do that, I imagine. So that maybe will hopefully come soon.
Maybe two.
Well, again, I feel like the combination of you and Linus is really the ultimate plan there.
Co-CEOs of Jaguar.
Co-CEOs of Jaguar. Yeah, I think you can do it. I think you've got the right temperament. You've got the admiration for the brand. I think it's
got the right attention span.
Exactly. Yeah. It's exactly. Speaking of attention spans, another fantastic article. And you're going to have to fill me in on this because somehow I missed it, even though I was there. Canadian Land Rover owners in Edmonton are having their Land Rovers stolen at a staggering rate.
This is true. Yeah, police have been warning owners of newer Land Rovers 2017 to 2021. Your Land Rover is not safe. Apparently, there's a theft ring operating in Edmonton.
A gone in 60 seconds style theft ring.
They're targeting Land Rovers. And they've got pretty sophisticated anti-theft technology,
new one
keys and these sorts of things. But they're wondering if maybe it's a former technician
job.
at the Land Rover dealer who's making false keys and being able to start these Land Rovers and stealing them. So something like 10 Land Rovers have been stolen in the Edmonton area.
Wow.
All within a very short period of time. So somebody is targeting those vehicles, which is kind of interesting.
I'll tell you this, being from Calgary, there is a natural rivalry. We hate Edmonton. We hate the people from Edmonton. So I would say they deserve it. It's just
maybe they're not from Edmonton. Maybe they're just visiting.
They're just visiting. They're coming in, they're stealing all the Land Rovers, and then they're leaving. It's only a matter of time until the Nicolas Cage, Angelina Jolie Land Rover theft ring eventually shows up in your city.
Could be.
Be aware.
This could be a nationwide epidemic.
What do you do? It's funny. I was listening to, while I was in Canada, a news report from someone who was a security expert on new cars. And, this reprogramming is a big problem, right? Where you do the programming theft and you essentially make a copy of the key and you steal the car. And they were saying, well, the best deterrent is things like use the club on your steering wheel. That's the best thing you can do.
It's come full circle, right?
It's come full circle.
And this is an unusual problem for probably that area. Those of our listeners who are in the UK are probably used to having their things stolen, their Land Rovers stolen on a regular basis. If you look at the Land Rover magazines in the UK, the amount of anti-theft equipment is just incredible. There's safes that you can bolt around your pedals.
Yes.
And steering wheel covers that are made entirely of metal.
Steel, yeah.
Like chains that you can chain your axles to posts that you set into the ground. It's insane.
I like the one where you can take your steering wheel off, like a Formula One car, and put a locked, sort of hub thing over top of your steering wheel.
It's wild.
Yeah, it's great.
It's wild. I'm not sure I could exist in that level of theft.
In fact, I want to say someone on either our Facebook group, and if you're not a member of the Facebook group, you really should be. It's just constant.
Absolutely.
Wow, such good times. They had said something about the key for their pedal locking box broke off in the lock. And so they're like, I guess we're taking the bus today because I have to get that key, fish that key out of there. Yeah.
Several years ago, I purchased a Land Rover out of a swamp. We called it the Swamp Thing. Covered in reeds. It was an ex-military Series 2A. And this guy that lived in a bog, part of a reclaimed area of a lake, he had this Land Rover and he sold it to me for $500. This has been a while ago.
Yeah.
And it ran and it drove and it was from England. And it was just this really disgusting Land Rover with 10 layers of paint covered in mud.
Yes.
And I got it and I realized that it had many, many alarm systems. We counted 5 different alarm systems with door triggers and all these things. It was incredible. The amount of wiring was equal to or greater than the entire wiring harness of the vehicle with just alarm systems and speakers and triggers and all these things. It was pretty intense.
A second wiring harness specifically for security.
For alarm systems.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a key fob. You could turn it on and off. Beep, boop. Your muddy, gross work truck. Who would steal that? No one here would steal that.
Yeah, I don't even take the keys with me when I park my cars around. So if anybody's in the northern part of Los Angeles, I'm not going to tell you what city I live in just in case. But the keys are just often in my cars because you know what? I encourage you to try to start some of them. I think modern car thieves. But they're not going to be able to get it started.
Unless they're in England. They'll steal anything.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Steal anything. Yeah. Those are, again, it's a gone in 60 seconds situation over there.
If you read some of the UK motorcycle magazines, they do destructive testing on anti-theft devices. And the winning anti-theft device for a motorcycle was defeated in 3 minutes or something. They really they take oxyacetylene torches and plasma cutters and angle grinders and all kinds of stuff. And I guess they use the same tools that the thieves use. Here in the United States, catalytic converter theft is a big deal, because of all the precious metals in the catalyst.
That's right.
And Land Rovers have been the target of this. In fact, my own Defender 90 and my Defender 110 both had the catalyst stolen out of it. Everything else that I've ever owned is too old to have.
Doesn't have that. Yeah.
But it's very frustrating because you're like, oh man, original catalysts are not available. You have to buy
that's right.
aftermarket ones, and they're super expensive, several $1,000. So it's definitely a bummer when that gets stolen.
Well, and it ends up having to be welded into your exhaust system and everything. It's not a great thing. Now, I have seen in the same way that the UK has pedal boxes and steering wheel removal things, people building full jungle gyms around their catalytic converters these days to, to keep them from getting stolen, which is pretty fun.
I saw one fellow who had, in addition to like a plate, steel, and angle iron like cage around his catalyst, he had written in weld, "Get a job," to potential thieves that might crawl under his car with a Sawzall.
I like to think that people, roll under the stage 1 or the series 3 or something and just get covered in oil and are disappointed that there's either they think somebody's already been there or it just doesn't. And then I guess it's true. SUVs, if you've got to roll under something and Sawzall out a catalytic converter, an SUV is where you're going to go first because it's easy. You got lots of room.
Yeah, plenty of room. So the Land Rovers are definitely, I think, a ripe target for catalyst thief.
Yeah, for thievery, for theft of things. Speaking of theft, something I am considering stealing, as you know, I have a deep-seated, it's fair to say, passion for the Jimny, the Suzuki Jimny.
Oh, amazing
my favorite car in the world. My favorite car in the world. Well,
very disappointing that Suzuki left the U.S. market before that was introduced. Like, there's a 3 or 4 year gap between Suzuki leaving and the Jimny being introduced.
I know. I think they would have sold Jimnys here. I think they're a ton. I'm surprised they don't make some kind of an arrangement with another company to sell it under license or something here. Like that they wouldn't do that. I want one so bad. Well, anyways, they now have a 5-door version, which I have to say, it's okay. I don't know. I don't love it, but I don't hate it.
I think one of the things I like about the Jimny is it's compact and, it's still a very narrow, small, lightweight vehicle, but it's just longer. It looks a little ungainly.
Yeah, it does look like the back doors were like an emergency afterthought. Like it was in case of emergency, use those back doors.
But, I think one thing that it does say is that there's a market for a compact, simple, economical SUV that's capable and solid axle and, a little box on wheels. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, I do too. I agree. If I could have one, and I've seen them, I see them on sale every once in a while. You go by a Craigslist or something and somebody's got a Jimny and it's, registered in Oaxaca or something, and they're just like, just buy it, it's fine. First of all, buying a car that's registered out of the country in the country is super illegal. Second of all, if you were to ever get into any kind of an accident or anything, that would be not a great day for anybody involved. So unfortunately, I can't have a Jimny, at least not yet.
You can have the most unsafe lifted Samurai with a shackle reversal, but not a Jimny.
Not a Jimny. No, that's right. Essentially, you can have a golf cart with street tires on it, and that's fine, but not a Jimny. God forbid.
Here in Oregon, we have a small company called Arkimoto, which makes a 3-wheeled electric car that they call an FUV, which I think is not the best name. It's the FU vehicle.
It sure is the FU vehicle.
They say it's the fun utility vehicle, but it sure is. Yeah, sure is. Yeah. At any rate,
sure. Yeah.
They have somehow managed to convince the state of Oregon that it has a roll bar on it, and usually in the state of Oregon, at least, if it has 3 wheels, it's classified as a motorcycle instead of a car.
That's right.
Because it doesn't have to meet crash test standards.
That's right.
So they've managed to convince the state of Oregon that it skirts the some sort of gray area, so it's safe enough that you don't have to take a motorcycle class or get a motorcycle endorsement or wear a helmet, but it's apparently it's exempt from crash testing, so it's just this crazy gray area.
Take our word for it. This thing's great. You're gonna be fine. Don't worry.
Yeah. So every time I see one of those things scooting around, and I'm like, you can't drive a Jimny because it's unsafe, but you can drive this like 3-wheeled go-kart on the street without a helmet.
3-wheeled go-kart. Yeah.
It's wild.
I know.
It's wild.
Yeah, it's not fair. It feels very targeted. I feel like they've decided that I shouldn't have a Jimny. So that's it. They're not even gonna let them in the country.
Yeah, you can have an Arkimoto, but you can't drive a little key pickup from Japan, one of those little Japanese mini trucks.
Yeah,
those things
so
are amazing.
I love them. Yeah, I'm a big fan. Speaking of big fans, speaking of my ability to segue at a ninja level, I think they're just seamless. A new segment here on the show because, of course, the show comes out every Monday. So brand new segment we're calling Winch Wednesdays, which is where we will talk about a different winch every Monday. I think the name makes total sense. So this week on Winch Wednesdays, we'll talk about the Land Rover Hydraulic Winch.
Yeah, so the Land Rover Hydraulic Winch was developed in the late 50s, and I believe it came out in the early 60s. So I'm not sure of the exact date, but it is the first winch that is a Land Rover branded winch. So not only was this a factory approved accessory, when you look at one of these, it actually has the Land Rover logo cast into the winch body. So it's a really neat thing, like I can't think of another manufacturer, another winch for another type of vehicle. Like there's not a Dodge Power Wagon winch. There's not a, Jeep winch or a Toyota winch. Actually, there might be a Toyota winch now that I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, there may be a Toyota winch. They may have done.
PTO winch. But at any rate, I digress. The Land Rover winch is pretty cool. It's typically fitted with a PTO-driven hydraulic pump.
Right.
And it is one of the more complicated pieces of optional equipment. If you look at the optional equipment manual, it has a very big section devoted to the care, service, testing, maintenance of your Land Rover hydraulic winch. And the fitting instructions are like 50 pages. It's got so many parts to it. It's so complicated. It has the PTO, of course.
Yeah.
The PTO shifter.
Right.
It has a hydraulic tank that's mounted usually to the rear of the vehicle. So I think it's
like somewhere in the fender boxes, or where does that sit?
Yeah, underneath the rear fender, usually on the left-hand side of both 109 and 88 models. And I think it's a 4 or 5 gallon hydraulic tank. So bunch of oil. You've got a bunch of hydraulic oil. Which we'll come back to that in a minute.
That's important because, exactly.
Yeah, so you've got the PTO, you've got the hydraulic tank, you've got a spool valve, the valve for the winch itself.
Yeah, the in
and
and
then
out,
you also have the pump on the back of the transmission, right? And then you have the winch motor that bolts to the winch itself, the hydraulic winch motor. So, and then you have lines that go to all of these places, right? So you've got lines going from the front of the car to the back of the car, and then to the pump and to the valve. And so there's a ton of hydraulic lines. There's clips to hold the hydraulic lines in place. There's a lot to it. There's a lot of things. You got the PTO shifter through the seat box.
Yep.
You've got the valve that goes through the seat box.
Yep.
So there's holes everywhere.
Yes.
And a lot of hardware. If you put all of this in a pile, it's roughly the size of a 48-inch pallet. It probably weighs,
I was going to say,
with
it
the
weighs
hydraulic oil.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably like 300 or 400 pounds. It's a bunch of stuff.
And a big old spool of wire rope as well. Like the drum is humongous.
Yeah. It is. Yeah, it holds a lot of cable.
Yeah.
So it's a complicated, and it was a very expensive accessory. So you don't often see it.
Right.
But it found its way onto a few factory-prepared expedition vehicles, and it was sort of a specialist piece of equipment. It was a common fitment for 1-ton Land Rovers in the late 60s, like mid to late 60s. So things like British Telecom and, where they're laying a lot of cable and line in the ground, utility services. And they made a version for forward controls. So you sometimes see them on forward control trucks. So working vehicles, municipal maintenance vehicles, these sorts of working roles. And so it's a cool thing to see today. And it's a little unusual to see because it was an expensive accessory, but it's super neat. So they made 2 different versions in addition to the forward control one. They made the Mark I hydraulic and a Mark II hydraulic. And they're typically distinguished. They actually say right on it, like Land Rover with the oval, and then it says
cast right into the side of the housing.
Right in.
Very cool. Yeah.
There's 2 different types of fair leads. There's a roller fair lead and a house fair lead, or a letterbox. Sometimes it's called in the UK a letterbox fair lead. And the letterbox fair lead is super cool because you really see that big winch casting And I like the letterbox one, even though the one that I have is
Yeah.
a roller fair lead, which is it's like almost a foot square. It's a
It's
huge
humongous.
fair
Yeah,
lead.
it's just humongous. Yeah.
It's massive.
Yeah,
And if
yeah.
you're used to like a worn fair lead, they're
Yeah.
like 4.5 by 10.
Yeah,
I
they're
think.
very
So
tiny. Yeah.
it's easily twice the size of that thing.
Yeah.
But we used one when you were here this past weekend.
That's right,
We
yep.
we pulled it out, and previous to that, we had taken a trip to the desert, and we managed to wedge the car that has it into a ditch.
Yes.
And then when we went to use the winch, we realized that the leak that it had was a little more substantial, and it leaked out enough fluid that the winch was not functional.
It
So
wouldn't work. Yeah.
we were low on fluid, and it was kind of an unfortunate timing. But so check your hydraulic fluid if you have a Land Rover hydraulic winch.
Is the filler on the inside of the car, or is there a hole made on the outside of it? I know the answer because I know there's not a hole on the outside of that car, but
Well, the answer is actually kind of both. So it
Yeah.
has a drain, and you can drain it from the outside. Typically, they have a rubber plug on the outside of the car.
Mhm.
It has about a 3-inch hole,
Mhm.
and you can access the drain. And I think there's a little screen in there as well.
Yeah.
And then on a 109, which is my vehicle, it has a filler inside the toolbox. So basically,
right.
the hydraulic tank fits where the left-hand toolbox is on a 109 regular.
Yep.
And I guess it would be the same on a wagon because the gas filler is on the
Yep.
right-hand side.
Is on the right hand side.
So you can recognize these trucks because they have a 3-inch hole with a rubber plug on the side.
Mhm.
Even if you don't see the winch, you can say,
Right.
or maybe if it had a winch, you can say, hey, oh, look, it had the hydraulic tank there. So you open up the toolbox, and then there's a filler cap there, which is about the same size as the underseat filler for an auxiliary fuel tank.
Mhm.
And it takes a whole lot of hydraulic oil.
Yeah, like a ton of hydraulic oil.
A whole lot of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it can run like all day. It's
Yeah.
really an amazing winch. And one thing that's really great about the hydraulic winch is, because it's a valve, you can open it up a little bit.
Yeah.
And you can move the cable just ever so slightly.
Mhm.
The other thing that's cool is you can run the PTO, when you operate this winch, there's a lot of levers.
Yes.
And you've got to use the transfer case lever. So
Mhm.
there's one.
Yeah.
So you put the transfer case in neutral.
Mhm.
And then the main gear shift lever, you can put it in first through fourth gear
Right.
to drive the winch.
Mhm.
So you can kind of pick the speed. I think that the manual says, operate it in second. But if you want to bump up the line speed, you can operate it in fourth
Yeah.
gear. And that's the PTO. It drives the PTO at that speed, 1-to-1 ratio in fourth gear. And then you've got the lever that's on the spool valve itself. Then you've got the lever that's on the winch, which is like the clutch, the dog clutch on the
Yep.
winch itself.
Yep.
So,
The
and you've got the
42
PTO.
levers later.
you've got the PTO levered. You have to engage the PTO. So you
Yeah.
got 5 levers that you have to operate
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
engage the winch. Plus, you can use the clutch to
Right. Yes. Yeah, of course.
operate
of
the
car.
PTO.
Yeah. Yeah.
So 5 levers and a pedal to
Yes.
operate a winch. It's very complicated. It's very complicated.
And there's only 16 hoses, a tank, and 250 pounds of steel in that operation. So, yeah.
I think for most people, it's a little excessive, but
Yeah.
man, it is a cool
It's super
looking
cool.
piece of equipment.
Yeah.
And to have the Land Rover stamp on there, I think they were actually built by Aero Parts, who was kind of
Yeah.
famous for building the first capstan winches.
Yeah.
And they built the rear PTOs and some other like Land Rover optional
Mhm.
equipment. So that's cool. It's an Aero Parts product. I like that stuff. It's really a neat thing, but the ability to control the line speed, like if you have a Warn 8274 winch,
Yep.
it's a great winch, but it's
Yeah.
got one speed,
Yep.
And I say that, and I am taking into consideration that the speed changes with each
Mhm.
layer of cable,
Mhm.
like because the diameter of the drum changes with each layer of cable.
Yep.
So it does vary, but the motor only really has one speed
Right.
until you put a load on it, and you can't really
Mhm.
control the amount of load that it has on it. So when you push the button, it's kind of going.
It's going to be what it is. And
It's
even
gonna
if
be
you
what it
bridge
is.
it over to 24 volts, a lot of people will do that to do a really quick wire recovery, but you can't really winch like that. So then you're switching back to 12 volts to winch and then over to 20 volts to pull in. And yeah, that winch happens to be the fastest of electric winches. The other winches take forever. A non-top motor winch takes forever and a day to pull in sometimes. Certainly the super winch that they used on the Campbell Trophy trucks is the slowest in the world, so much so that they put special cleats on the brush bar to just wrap the cable like it was a boat, because trying to draw in that cable it was never worth it. It would take forever.
And you saw when we were winching that log with the Land Rover Hydraulic Winch, you had a lot of control. You can go really slow, but you can also spool the cable in really quickly. And so I think that's the advantage of this. There's a couple of advantages. One, it looks amazing.
It looks super cool, yeah.
And two, you have a lot of fine control over the line speed. And you're going to, if you've got a piece of metal that you want to bend, or you're trying to move something very small amount, you have a lot of fine control over that winch line. So
yeah,
I think that's the big advantage to it. That, in addition to the fact that the motor's never going to get too hot. You could winch all day, unlike an electric winch, which is going to overheat. But the downsides are super heavy, super complicated, super expensive.
Yeah.
And it is not the easiest thing to operate, I suppose.
You're a little low on fluid. You're going to get stuck in a crevasse.
And it doesn't work when the engine's not running. So
that's right.
Pros versus cons, those are the things. But if you got to do a lot of winching, like if you're pulling miles of cable as a utility company, maybe it's a good choice.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, that's pretty fantastic Winch Wednesday installation there, and we'll put some of that footage from this last weekend up on the old internet so that folks can take a look at one of those in action. I don't know that a lot of people have actually seen a modern video of a Land Rover hydraulic winch. Certainly, there's great old Land Rover videos using the hydraulic winch and things, but those are from the 1960s, and ours is slightly better. Not a lot, let's be honest, just only slightly. But, last up for today, it is a segment that everybody loves. And it's one that I love because I love tools so much that, Cooper won't go to college because I have 9 different types of crow's feet wrenches. So just how it is. It's a tip-top tool tip this week, all about bench vices, which I'm a fan of. I'm a fan of vintage bench vices, which is like having a heroin habit. It's about the same amount of money that you put into stupid, shitty old things, but that's kind of what this show is about, I think.
So tell me about your favorite vintage vise.
I have a Wilton mechanics vise from the late 1950s, which came to me as a pile of rusted, like a boat anchor. I think somebody had found it behind someone's house, and it had sat outside, and we took it all apart, and we stripped it all down, and we repainted it, and we polished the jaws, and we did machine new jaw inserts and things. But now she's as good as new, and I actually use it frequently. I use it all the time, and it is one of those things where, yes, you can buy a vise, an Irwin vise or something like that at one of the big box hardware stores for $100 or whatever, but not until you own, I would say a classic vise like anvils. We don't really need more vices in the world. We've already made all the vices we'll ever really need. You just have to go find an old one. But even a good, I'm a big Wilton fan. Good manufacturer, American-made, a vise like that. They have extraordinary clamping force, not just for holding on to things, for setting bearings, for pushing bearings out, all kinds of their incredibly useful things. I have a big new Wilton one on my welding table, and I have my mechanics one, and then a smaller mechanics one over on the rebuild bench. And they're fantastic. What's your favorite vise manufacturer?
Well, I would say that I don't just have one. I think a vise is one of those things where, there are several different ones for different jobs. And I use a number of different vices at work to hold various things, and they have various jaws. But in terms of vintage vices, I think I would say that the Wilton is kind of has become known as the gold standard. Just because they're still in business. They've been in business forever. It's a wonderful vise. They made a ton of different variations of that vise. And I have several different Wiltons. I have a Wilton Cadet, which is their version of what they call a bullet vise. It has a rounded end on it.
Rounded end, It
has a swivel base. They made them in both swivel and non-swivel. I have a Wilton 2-inch bullet vise. Which is a nice really cool. It's a tiny little guy, and they had a ball and socket that mounted to, so you could move things around, and that's really great. Like as a welding fixture, you can kind of clamp it in there and then move it. to get just the right angle to do some fine TIG welding or fine work. And then, of course, you've got all the way up to like a railroad vise,
Right.
like an 8-inch,
Yes. Yeah.
probably weighs 600 pounds, huge piece of equipment.
Yeah.
There's some other really great brands of vise that were American made. The Parker vices are good. The Reed vices are good. I have a really excellent Reed vise that a late friend of mine, Carla Satra, who was an excellent machinist, took all apart, hand scraped all of the ways, made a new bushing to take up any slack and a new screw. And that's a really like a pleasure to use that Reed vise. And then I think for comedic value, the Starrett Athole vise, which is you can't not laugh when you you're like, I need an Athole vise.
And this vise is a total Athole.
It's hilarious. It's hilarious. So the Athole, and it's a great vise too. It's a classic American vise made by the Starrett company who made all the measuring tools. So that's a quality piece of equipment if you have an Athole vise. I also like the lever vices, and there's some British brands of lever vices. They're kind of like a quick release vise, and they make them in various sizes. The Stevens lever vise is a classic, and I feel like you, as a Stevens, should own a Stevens lever vise.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah,
and so that's like a quick release vise, like you would use in a drill press or something. But they make them as a bench vise, and it has a big chunky lever on the side, and it's really quick to use. There's a number of other vices for clamping uneven pieces of material. Like if you wanted to, for example, clamp a crescent wrench into a vise, there's vices that would accommodate that. And those are really on the machinist's spectrum of the vices, but there's some really cool ones. A modern made one is like, I think it's called a matrix pin vise.
Yeah, pin vices. Yeah.
That thing will hold a lot of unevenly shaped materials.
They're incredible. Yeah, they look like a fractal really cool drawing sort of that will like sort of mold itself around, but with like extraordinarily high clamping force, hundreds of pounds of clamping force around a circular object or something. It's really cool. Those are really neat.
Some engravers use vices like that to hold various pieces of equipment, and so they can rotate something and hold unevenly shaped. Like, how do you clamp a pocket watch for engraving?
Exactly, right. Yeah,
it's very difficult. So I love vices. If you find a Wilton bullet vise at a yard sale for $50,
get it.
That's a good day.
And the fact is that, no matter how rusted or destroyed it looks, the fact is it's an incredibly simple machine. It's essentially a screw with a nut, and, the surface rust, all that sort of stuff cleans up very easily. In the very rare case you may have to machine, or have the screw machined if it's really bad, or even replaced. There are people who make replacement parts for these 1930s, 1920s vices. It's just one of those sort of hobby things where a lot of blacksmiths have them and things. So there are replacement parts, and there's artisan or craftspeople that are making, you can get an Acme screw, for instance, for almost any Wilton vise. My 880 has an Acme screw in it. So meaning there's no backlash in either direction. Why you would want that for for a vise, it's so that you can get extraordinarily precise amounts of pressure on something. And sometimes it's not always about pressing something in. It's about sort of pressing and pulling and, all of that. And then, of course, I have a couple of different Kurt vices for my milling machine. Milling machine vices are a whole different, that's a completely different discipline of vices, but those flat holding, meant to be extraordinarily rigid. And Kurt is sort of the gold standard, certainly, for those things. They are, in fact, they have gold handles. They're crazy. The amount of force that one of those vices can put on something, you'll realize that the first time you accidentally clamp an aluminum plate or something in there a little bit too tight, and it just pringles it immediately. You have to be really careful about how much pressure you're putting on it. But yeah, they're incredible.
If you like vices and you want to learn more about the different vintage vices and see, how different ones work and stuff, there's a couple of good Instagram accounts. Vice for Vices is this fellow that is really super into those. And I think there's another one that's like, I want to say it's Mech's Shop. And it's a Hispanic guy who has a really incredible collection of vices, everything from the tiniest little ones all the way up to the giant railroad vices. And that guy's collection is insane. And he has all the vice displays. So from the tiniest little one to the biggest, giantest one.
Mm-hmm.
And you can kind of see how they all stack up, and he's always restoring them. The other guy that does very good vice restorations, I think, is Caveman Welder.
Mm-hmm.
And he does like just incredible vice restorations on vintage vices, and he does all of the machine work to make them fit perfectly together.
Yeah.
He makes new jaws for them out of various materials. So depending on what you're holding, he has various hardnesses of jaws for the different ones. And he really takes pride in, the quality of his workmanship and machining the ways just so, and just making them super nice. It's pretty awesome to watch.
And vice jaw inserts is a great like hobby machinist sort of first project. Like they just need to be square and squared, and they're just little rectangles with 2 holes in them traditionally. So it's a really good like first machinist project. Like you don't
can be complicated though.
It can
you
be,
can make
especially
it
getting
complicated.
them in planar as well. And like
and making the parallel grooves in them just so making all of them just. That diamond machining pattern. A lot of jaws are cast.
Yeah, and my the bigger, certainly the Kurt vices, but also the the bigger Wilton vices. He has dovetailed inserts, so they aren't screwed in; they're dovetailed in. But the dovetail is a taper, so it goes in from one side and needs a couple little light taps, and then it's locked in, and it can't move horizontally when it's under pressure. And those are a bit of a trick to machine, but yeah, I have a few different. One of these days I'm going to sit down and I'm actually going to make a few different hardnesses, because I have a brass set that is pretty. It's seen better days. It's done a lot of clamping.
So I found that Instagram account that is the that fellow that collects and displays vices. It's Mexa Shop, MEXA Shop 1. And if you go through his account, there's the number, diversity, size, scale of his vice collection is it's on another level. That guy's
he's the Linus of vice collectors.
Yeah, he really is. He does a really amazing job of displaying them on his Instagram. Check it out for sure if you like vintage vices.
Yeah,
Highly
and
recommend.
if you're spending time working on your vintage Land Rover, a vice is like such an incredible tool that if it's from holding shit to pressing things in to pressing things out to, it's almost impossible to rebuild a swivel housing or something without a good vice, because, you just have to hold on to those things in such weird angles to drive things in square and straight and all of that. And so really great yard sale find too. They're very findable still. They made so many of them, and everybody's grandpa had a really good one. And now it is sitting out in someone's yard waiting for you to pay $2 for it because it weighs 900 pounds and nobody wants to drag it back into the house. So, get one and take it apart and restore it. And it's a fun project. They're super fun. That and old axes. I love old axes. So there you go.
That'll be another discussion.
That'll be another one. Well, that's too much vintage talk today without Linus involved. He'll be upset if we chat about old rusty things for too much longer without looping him in. So Ike, as always, it's been a slice, and we've got some fun stuff coming up. As we know, we have great interaction going on the Facebook group. Dixon was nice enough to find apparently an open line at the Ottawa Provincial Prison that he's currently in, and dropped us a line making sure that we know all the details about the upcoming Anarch Greek Peak 75th anniversary. We're going to do our very best to get out there. Chatted with Bob Steele via email a little bit the other day, as well as Dixon, and man, we're going to try. I think, and we're going to put this out in the world, I think you and Dixon in a very old series car should do some kind of challenges against John Kasich and I in a Freelander, and see who comes out on top. I think that'd be the event of the year.
I think it'd be great.
I'm just throwing that out there. If we want to make that happen, if there are people with the means to make that happen, I'm just going to put it out into the world, see what the world returns back. So at that, it's been a slice as always, and good luck out there, and we'll talk to you next week.
All right. Looking forward to it. Take care.
The
The Underpowered Hour is produced by Liza Barris, Ike Goss, and me, Steve Barris.
Pavel Svardov composed and performed our theme music. Consider supporting the show on Patreon, and if you already do, thank you. Your support makes the show possible. For even more, check out our Instagram or Facebook.